Hi, Tom.
Hi, Rob.
So what's going on here? Mine looks like a little car and yours looks like a big bike.
Oh, that's true, Robert. And therein lies the dilemma for testers who are presented with vehicles like this and they may be unfamiliar with them.
And I imagine it's important that they're at the right class of test station.
Exactly. Some of these vehicles have steering suspension that's similar to motorcycles, but despite this, they must be tested in vehicle test stations authorised for Class 3 or 4.
Not at a motorcycle
No.
test station. What about bikes with sidecars?
Well, they have to be tested at vehicle test stations authorised for 1 or 2.
Okay, so I imagine we're going to be looking at these, at things like the Morgan three-wheeler, Del Boy's van, the Robin Reliant, the Scammell Scarab and the mechanical horse.
Yeah, don't get carried away. Today we're just going to be looking at Trikes and Quads. You see there's a section in the inspection manual, section 9, and it covers them. And for Trikes and Quads, it's additional testing information. So it needs to be read in conjunction with all the other sections of the inspection manual. For instance, if you've got a vehicle that's got motorcycle-derived steering and suspension, then section 9.2 replaces section 2.1 and 2.2. But all the rest of section 2 needs to be referred to. Now, the trouble with them is they come in all shapes and sizes, different weights, different wheel arrangements, engine sizes, fuel types. Yeah, I've got some pictures here. Let's have a look at these ones here. See? Now see that?
Oh, look at that.
Now that's a pickup. It's a goods vehicle. And this one, that's got a whacking great V8 engine, automatic gearbox, and the back axle's a Jaguar E-Type.
I think I've worked with him.
I know, that is me, myself, personally, what is testing that. I tested that at a goods vehicle test station.
Right. Looks a bit daunting.
Not really, provided you follow the procedure and standards, it's not a problem.
And I guess that the manual tells you which class the vehicle is and what the test requirements are.
Yeah, as it always does. There's a chart in there, so the tester shows them how to decide which class. So if I try and explain that to you, if you had a vehicle with an engine size not more than 50 cc's and a maximum speed of 45 kilometres per hour, that's a moped, although it may have 3 wheels.
Right.
Now, if you've got one with an engine size over 50 cc's or capable of higher speeds, yeah, that's a trike.
And what about weight? Is that important?
Yeah, it's very important. You see, if the unladen weight is not more than 450 kilos, then it's tested as a Class 3. If the unladen weight is more than 450 kilos, it's tested as a Class 4, even if it's a trike. Now, the next bit's a little bit trickier.
Go for it.
Okay. If you've got a vehicle with 4 wheels and the unladen weight maximum is 350 kilos, that would be a moped if it met all those moped rules like engine size and maximum speed. That's known as a light quad. So that brings me nicely to quads. 4 wheels, of course, a maximum net power output from the engine 15 kilowatts. There's 2 unladen weights, maximum unladen weights to think about, 400 kilos or 550 kilos if it's a goods vehicle.
And what class are they tested as?
Well, it's easy. 4 wheels, Class 4. Do you want me to go through the whole thing again?
I think not right now, Tom. If I'm in any doubt, I can look in the manual.
Yeah, well done.
Now, you say these vehicles obviously are very unusual. They come in all different shapes and sizes with different engines.
Yeah, and some of them have electric motors. And for mopeds, that must be not more than 4 kilowatts maximum output.
And how would you know that?
Right. If it's not stamped on the machine or the vehicle, then the presenter needs to provide documentary evidence of that. And one final thing, as we're talking about electrically powered vehicles, that maximum unladen weight I've spoken about does not include the battery power pack.
Now, Tom, what about trikes that have outrigger wheels? So, in fact, there are 5 wheels.
Right, this is a case of when there's a 5-wheel vehicle, a 3-wheel vehicle. Those outriggers are stabilisers. They're not normally in contact with the road. So, for testing, that's a trike, that's how we consider it. But if a tester were to find a defect in the stabiliser assembly, then they treat it as an anti-roll bar assembly, because that's its function. And if that defect met the reason for rejection, it would fail.
And are the normal refusal to test criteria the same?
Yes, they are. So, having said that, let's go and test these.
Yeah, okay. So Tom, do you have an inspection procedure?
Yes, and this is laid out in the introduction in the inspection manual on pages 8 and 9. And as you can see, that's for a car, but the principles are the same for trikes or quads. I mean, a tester will do the route that's best for them, but this is the one that we recommend. So having said that, we would start in the driver or rider's position and check all the testable items that are available. Then move to the near side of the front of the vehicle and across the front of the vehicle to the offside. Then along the offside to the rear offside, and then across the rear, we're back at the near side again, and then come forward to the front near side, checking all the testable items for presence, security, condition and operation.
And the underside?
Pretty much the same for the underside. The big question here is whether the vehicle will fit over the pit or on the hoist. But we'll deal with that when we get to the underside. I want to start here in the driving position.
And just before you start here, this engine is warm, so isn't this the best time to do the emissions test?
No, because we don't do emissions tests on trikes and quads.
That's a good reason.
Yeah. Having said that, if the vehicle emitted substantial quantities of avoidable smoke, then the tester could refuse to test.
I'll let you carry on then,
Yeah.
Tom. This vehicle looks as if it has motorcycle-derived steering and suspension. Does it?
No, it doesn't, but it does have handlebars, so I'm going to talk about the procedures of checking the components. There's no steering wheel.
I had spotted that. So what are you looking for here?
All right, I'm looking to see, are they deformed, fractured, cracked, excessively corroded? Are the clamp bolts tight? Any of the bolts loose or missing? And then I move to the handlebar grips. Are they missing? Are they not secure to the handlebars? And finally, if there were flexible handlebar mountings fitted, are they excessively deteriorated?
So that's the condition.
Yeah.
What about the operation?
Right, for the operation, I'm going to turn the steering from lock to lock. And I've got the road wheels resting on free moving turn plates, take the load off it. And so as I operate them, I'm checking, is there any fouling or restriction in movement? Yeah. Do the hand grips or any of the controls have no clearance with any part of the vehicle on either full lock? Yeah. And then for the steering, is there excessive stiffness or roughness?
And this has got something to do with head bearings, hasn't it?
Well, partly. When we're carrying out this check, one of the components we could be looking at would be lower head bearings. And if that were the case, then when we get that vehicle jacked up, we would carry out the same checks in case there were problems with the upper head bearings. And one final thing to talk about here, if a steering damper were fitted, if we could see a steering damper, we check to see, is it secure, is it effective, and does it impair the steering action?
Tom, you mentioned any controls, brakes, for example. What about them?
Right, this doesn't have brake controls, but if it did have, I'd be looking to see, are any of the attachment screws loose or missing? Are the controls fractured, cracked? Is there excessive wear in the pivots? Is there deliberate modification? Are they excessively corroded or inadequately repaired? And then for the operation, I'd be checking to see, is there inadequate reserve travel? Can you operate them smoothly on or off? Have they been damaged, positioned, bent or shortened in such a way that you cannot readily apply the brake? Or maybe you just can't move them because they're inoperative.
Which, of course, would be a problem.
Yeah.
What about mirrors? It's all about the right combination here, isn't it?
Yes. Section 9.8 in the inspection manual refers to mirrors, and it looks at bodied and unbodied vehicle. So if we've got a bodied vehicle, they must have at least 2 mirrors, and one of those mirrors must be fitted to the offside.
And what about unbodied?
Right, if it's unbodied vehicle and it's not a moped, then they must have 1 mirror fitted to the offside and 1 mirror fitted to the near side at least. That's the least requirement. If it were a moped, then they must have at least 1 mirror. And if it were first used from the 1st of August 1978, then that mirror must be fitted to the offside.
And you've talked about bodied and unbodied. It's obviously important that the tester knows how to tell the difference.
Yes, and in the introduction in the inspection manual, it gives you clear information about that. But as a guide, if a person sits in the vehicle and there's a surrounding structure, you know, they're enclosed, then that would be a bodied vehicle.
And does it need to have a roof?
How do I answer this, Robert? No.
Okay, what about a windscreen?
Right, now if it had a motorcycle style windshield fitted to an unbodied trike or quad, like the trike I was riding earlier, then that's not regarded as a windscreen and it's not subject to the inspections.
And if it isn't a motorcycle style windshield?
Right, then that would be tested as per section 8.3, which would obviously include wipers and washers.
And I imagine no windscreen, no wipers and washers check.
Yeah, exactly. We'll make a tester of you yet.
When I've seen you test a car before, you'd test the seatbelts at this stage. Am I right in thinking that these vehicles actually don't require them?
If only you were right, but unfortunately you're not. Those that are not required to be fitted with them are three-wheel mopeds and quads, not exceeding 250 kilos unladen weight. If you then think about types of seats, where you've got the tip-up occasional seats, they're not required to be fitted with them. If you've got an unbodied vehicle, where the driver's seat is the sit-astride saddle type, they're not required to be fitted with them. Any passenger seat of the type I've just described that's fitted immediately in front or behind the driver, so it's in the longitudinal plane, they're not required to be fitted with them.
So what about those that do?
Right, the requirements for those are listed in 9.5 and they apply to any vehicle first used from the 17th of June 1999. Section 5 of the inspection manual shows the requirement for vehicles used before that date. However, there are some type-approved unbodied vehicles that may not have seatbelts fitted, and that's also covered in section 9.5.
Great, Tom. And this is where you normally check the lights.
You know me so well, Rob.
And I imagine you need an assistant.
Yeah, any check where the tester cannot operate and examine the component at the same time, then assistance will be necessary.
And let me guess, the light requirements depend on whether it's a moped or not.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah. So, having said that, I'll start with mopeds. Now, depending on the width of the vehicle, and this is an important factor, you'll need at least one of dip beam headlamp, front position and rear position lamp, that's side light and tail light to you, stop lamp and rear reflector, and they must be mounted centrally.
And does this apply to all mopeds?
Well, no. You see, it's this width thing. If the width of the vehicle exceeds 1.3 metres, that's 1,300 mil, then they will need at least two of front and rear position lamps and stop lamps. Now, the reflectors are different. If it exceeds 1 metre, 1,000 millimetre, it will need at least two reflectors on any vehicle. Now, where two lamps are fitted, so let's say, for example, stop lamps, they must be fitted symmetrically.
And if it's not a moped?
If it's not a moped, then they'll need main beam, dip beam, front and rear position, stop lamp, hazard warning lamps, registration plate lamp, and rear reflectors. And the moped width rules are the same.
And don't some have to have two headlamps?
Right. If you've got motorcycle-derived trikes, they do, if their width exceeds 1.7 metres, 1,700 mil.
And did I fall asleep? Because I've heard no mention of direction indicators or rear fog lamps.
No, I thought I'd save them till last. For the rear fog lamps, there's absolutely no requirement. For direction indicators, you'll need at least two fitted to the front and to the rear. Now, they're required on three-wheel bodied mopeds and, of course, on any trikes or quads. And where you've got direction indicators, hazard warning lamps fitted, then you must have telltales.
And no doubt there's a chart in the manual.
There's actually two charts.
Great, double whammy. So that only leaves headlamp aim.
The tester will conduct the headlamp aim just as they do for any class 3 or 4 vehicle.
And at this point you'd walk round checking the top side, and here it's similar to a car, but the trike over there looks entirely different, Tom.
That's a good prompt, Rob, because what we're going to do now is use the trike to talk about the topside check.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, Tom, obviously to me the steering and suspension on this trike look just like a normal motorcycle. Most class 3 and 4 testers won't be familiar with this setup, so how should they go about it?
Just as they do for any steering or suspension that they examine. They'll check this front fork assembly for any component that's missing, loose or cracked. They'll check if they're excessively bent, misaligned, corroded, worn. They'll check for excessive free play in the sliding members of the forks, pivot bearings or bushes. And they'll check to see is it restricted in operation or fouling. And then they'll examine the dampers for security, leaks, and obviously light oil misting is not a reason for ejection. They'll also examine them for fouling and the damping effect. They can apply the front brake on this type of vehicle so that will help them when they carry out the bounce test and check the damping effect.
And what if the dampers have got gaiters or shrouds?
Right, none of the reasons for ejection for the fork assembly apply to the gaiters or shrouds. The tester can pull back the gaiter to aid the inspection, provided there's no dismantling, and of course they must be correctly refitted.
So that's the dampers. What about the springs?
The springs, they check them just as they do any other spring.
And what if the tester comes across any modifications?
That's just a matter of assessing the vehicle structure as you would any prescribed area.
When would be the best time to jack the front suspension?
This would normally be done when you've completed the underside inspection, you know, when it's still over the pit or on the hoist. But at this point, I want to continue talking about the topside check. It's as per the routine that we discussed earlier, walking around the vehicle, checking all the testable items. The tester may find some items that are a little bit different. For example, there could be driver and passenger footrests that are fitted for the safe operation of the vehicle, and they would check these for presence and security. There could be foot-operated brake controls on this type of vehicle, and they would apply the checks and criteria as per section 3.3 to 3.6. As they walk around the vehicle, they would be checking the body and structure as per section 6. And of course, although we're not doing emissions, we would be carrying out those other checks from that section.
What, like exhausts and fuel systems from section 7?
You never cease to amaze me, Rob.
I do my best, Tom. What about the rear suspension?
Well, on the rear suspension, if it had a motorcycle-derived suspension, then they would carry out the checks and criteria as per section 9.2. But if it was normal car suspension system, then they would apply the checks and criteria as per section 2.4, 2.6 and 2.7.
What now, Tom? The underside?
Yes, and the tester can use a similar routine to the one that's in the inspection manual, you know, starting at the steering and then working their way around the underside of the vehicle, checking each component as they come to it.
When you were in the driving seat of the quad, you mentioned steering checks with the front suspension jacked. Is that as straightforward as on a car?
For the majority of vehicles, it will be. Whether it's class 3 or 4 testing, they should have the necessary equipment. There is, however, a special notice that explains the difficulties in testing narrow track vehicles.
And is it now time to talk about bearing?
Yes, when you've got the vehicle jacked up, you'll carry out, again, those lock-to-lock checks and assess the condition of any upper head bearings that are fitted.
So from now on, it's pretty much like a normal car?
Yeah, the tester will assess the wheel and hub assembly and examine it for loose spindle or securing nut, and the locking devices for those securing nuts missing or insecure. They'll look at the wheel, check the wheel bearing for roughness, tightness or free play, and they'll check for any part of the assembly fouling any part of the vehicle.
And the tyre tread requirements, are there any differences there?
There's some. Section 9.4 needs to be read in conjunction with the tyre tread requirements in 4.1d. But basically, if there were a trike with an unladen weight exceeding 410 kilograms, or any quad, then we apply the 1.6 millimetre requirements. You know, the centre 3/4 around the complete tyre. If we had a trike with an unladen weight not exceeding 410 kilograms, and an engine capacity greater than 50 cc's, then we apply the 1 millimetre rule, which is, you know, any 3/4 around a complete tyre. Now, if we had a trike of the weight I've just mentioned that had an engine capacity not greater than 50 cc's, then all the original tread pattern needs to be visible, but there's no tread depth requirement.
And the jacking of the rear suspension?
There shouldn't be any real problems here, and of course the tester will conduct all the normal checks that they do with tyres, wheel bearings and suspension.
So on to the brake test now then, Tom.
Yeah.
And is it possible you might actually do a road test here?
Yes, this could happen if we couldn't fit the vehicle onto the roller brake tester, or if there wasn't enough information on the data chart and lockout wasn't achieved. Then the tester may do a decelerometer test, but only if it's safe to do so.
And the actual brake controls themselves are different to a normal car, so how do you deal with them?
It's not only design here, Robert, there's different requirements as well. So if I try and explain it this way, with the design, and I'm talking about service brake here, there's 3 different types. You can have one control that operates the whole braking system. You could have 2 controls, each operating separate halves of the system. Or you could have 2 controls, at least one of which operates the whole system, and these ones we refer to as linked braking systems.
And what are the requirements of the service brake?
Okay, there's 3 requirements. So any quad, or trikes first used from the 1st of January 1968, they've got the service brake operated by one control working on all the wheels. Their minimum requirement is 50%. If you've got trikes first used before the 1st of January 1968, 3-wheel mopeds or light quads of any age with the same design service brake that I've just mentioned, their minimum requirement is 40%. And then if you've got braking systems that are operated by 2 separate controls, then one half of the system must achieve a minimum of 30% and the other half of the system minimum of 25%.
And don't they also need a park brake?
Yes, and that must be a separate control, and it must be able to be operated from the driving position. And all the checks on that are contained in section 3 of the inspection manual.
No doubt there then. What about the efficiency of the park brake?
Okay, the minimum requirement is 25% on a single line braking system and 16% for all other systems.
And all this detail is actually in a chart in the manual, isn't
Yeah.
it? Are there any other important points listed that we should know?
Yes, if the tester's dealing with linked braking system, then the force from all the wheels operated by that braking system must be used in the calculation. And finally, if the tester has a vehicle and there's insufficient information on the data chart and they haven't achieved lockouts on the brake performance, and it's not safe to conduct a decelerometer test, which, let's face it, isn't always easy on trikes and quads, then the presenter will be asked to provide the unladen weight, to which the tester will add 140 kilos for driver and fuel, etc. And this is the figure that they will use when they calculate the brake efficiency.
And the performance check is carried out in the same way as any class 3 or 4?
Yeah, this is the point, in fact, of section 9. It's supplementary information and additional reasons for ejection. It's as we said at the beginning, it must be used in conjunction with all other sections of the manual.
And are there any other final points you want to make?
There's one final thing that's worth testers remembering. They may be looking at what appears to be a small car, but it is in fact a quad. And speaking of small, I've got one thing I'd like to show you. All right?
Okay.
Do you want to follow me?
So Tom, would a tester need to wear a helmet if they're doing a road test?
There's no legal requirement, but we would always recommend it. And that one's yours, so put it on.